Well, let's go to our panel of female federal politicians. Tanya Plibersek can't be with us tonight. She has courteously indicated to me she has a prior commitment, and so does Terry Butler. But we welcome Michelle Rowland, who is the federal Labor member for the seat of Greenway, as in Francis Greenway, the great Australian architect in Sydney's northwest. She's been that member since 2010. She's the Shadow Minister for Communication. She has an honours degree from the University of Sydney, a Bachelor of Arts, but a master's degree in law, also from the University of Sydney. Before entering Parliament, she was a senior lawyer with Gilbert and Tobin. She was the Deputy Mayor of Blacktown City Council for a couple of years. So, Michelle, welcome to the panel. But we'll just go to Amanda Stoker first. We all know about Amanda. We love her. Very bright, Queensland Senator. Amanda, I'm mystified that when these people march in the streets or want to deface and destroy monuments, they're angry, they seem to hate their country and those who lead it, but they don't tell the truth. And Warren Mundine has said today all of that, and he argues that Indigenous issues are not really told as they should be. Amanda, why are leaders silent on all of this?
Well, look, I think that's the desired effect of those who would seek to wedge our society into pieces that can't talk to one another by using this toxic cancel culture and identity politics. Australians are fair-minded, common-sense people, and the dishonesty that is at the top, for instance, of the Black Lives Matter leadership is that it wants to try and split Australians into groups and blame one group for the hardship of another. The fact is all Australians want to see Indigenous Australians' life prospects improve. We're all on the same page about that. We've never spent more money as a country trying to make that happen. It's around about $20 billion a year now.
But, Amanda, if I could interrupt you there, sorry, for a moment. You see, this stuff's taught in schools and universities. And we fund schools and universities. And I've never heard, with all these protests, the Prime Minister or someone stand up and say, now listen, all you young Australians, you're not being told the truth. Why don't we hear that from our leaders?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister does something really very good, and that is that at every turn and at every opportunity, he calls for Australians to come together, for Australians to work together, to band together. And he never indulges this kind of nonsense. I really like the way that the Prime Minister stands up, for instance, for the complexity but also the reality of our history. He stood clearly against those who sought to put a black armband around Australia Day or those who seek to tear down statues of Captain Cook. I think he's been really very good in providing leadership that brings Australians together.
I'd like a bit more action when they're marching in the streets to be told, the nation to be told, hang on, they've got the message wrong. Michelle, welcome to the program, but can I just ask you, I mean, you're a highly educated lady. What hope do we have when the Deputy Chief Health Officer in Victoria, a medical doctor, attacked the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook, her words, landing at Botany Bay? And she talked about it being a sudden arrival of an invader from another land, decimating populations and creating terror. He played no part in European settlement. What hope have we got?
Well, she unfortunately wouldn't be the only one who got the facts wrong on history here. In fact, some of our parliamentary colleagues got that wrong too, Alan, so that in itself is disappointing. But I must say, someone who, as you said, has been in local government, few things annoy me more than the defacing of public property because it is wasted taxpayers' and ratepayers' money. And in these hard times, we shouldn't just dismiss that sort of graffiti as something that is a victimless crime. And it is very annoying. It goes into the millions of dollars in my local council area, for example. But the ultimate thing, Alan, is that by doing these acts, you're actually not obtaining the outputs that you want.
That's correct.
And in fact, we saw today this announcement of targets, which has bipartisan support, having First Nations leaders involved in this, having these new sets of standards by which we are going to measure progress. That is what we should be looking at.
But and nonetheless, Michelle, I agree with you. If I could just make a point there, though, because there was a Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody, and it found that the leading cause of black deaths in custody was not police violence, but natural causes, and that Aboriginal Australians were far more likely to die at the hands of other Aboriginal Australians than at the hands of white people. Now, that story is not being told, is it, Michelle?
Well, as you say rightly, the truth needs to be told, and that is the reason why that Royal Commission was set up in the first place, to have that transparency and to get to the truth. Because the fact is, Alan, in the late 1980s, we didn't have the reporting frameworks or the accountability mechanisms to actually establish the facts and work off how we were going to improve society. And one of the findings of the Royal Commission was that the reason why there are so many deaths in custody is that Aboriginal Australians were being arrested and jailed at disproportionately higher rates. Fact.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that my understanding is that that situation is by and large still the case today, which is why we need change.
But the trouble is, if I come to you, Amanda, the trouble is the violence towards Aboriginal women in Central Australia is appalling. I mean, in 2018 in the Northern Territory alone, 85% of Aboriginal victims of crime knew the offender. Half were victimised by partners. Aboriginal women made up 80% of those victims. Why isn't that story being told and those problems being addressed, Amanda?
I think part of the reason that problem's not being addressed is that it doesn't fit the narrative of those people who seek to divide Australians into groups that they can have at war with one another, in the metaphorical sense. And in a circumstance where a woman in Central Australia is 95 times more likely than a white woman to end up in hospital at the hands of domestic violence, we have a problem that we need to get real about. Now, I'm really encouraged to see Michelle saying common sense things about the harm that comes from tearing down statues. It's great to hear, but the reality is that what I hear from my Labor counterparts in the Senate is serious indulgence in the nonsense that is identity politics. The idea that we should divide Australians into groups based on genetic attributes we can't control and blame one another for things, it's an absurdity. What we need is to get away from treating some issues as taboo and encouraging harsh moral judgments of one another, and we need to understand that we need to be able to agree to disagree. We've got to be able to have hard conversations because that's how we solve the problems that face us as a country.
Well, I have to say I'm encouraged, Michelle. You and I don't think have ever spoken, and I'm sorry we've most probably run out of time. I want to question to you here, though, because the leading cause of deaths, again, from that Royal Commission, between 2014 and 18 for Aboriginal children was suicide, and there's no evidence to suggest that racism was the cause of suicide, but there is evidence that child abuse and neglect and sexual assault has led children to want to take their own lives. Those are the issues, Michelle, aren't they, that we should be addressing?
That's right, Alan, and I think what we need to understand here is that what we're talking about is intergenerational disadvantage in many forms. And once you have that intergenerational trauma and disadvantage, you need a circuit breaker in there. Now, I represent, Alan, many people might not know, but Blacktown, where I'm sitting tonight, is actually the place with the highest urban Indigenous population in New South Wales and probably one of the highest in Australia. So I come from a background where I have grown up with people who are Indigenous, and I have seen myself, having gone to school with a number of Indigenous people, it has been, for example, teachers. It has been people who have taken an interest in young people who would otherwise be caught in this cycle. But quite frankly, Alan, we should not be leaving this to chance.
No, we should not be. We should not be. Michelle, one of the great things I have to say that's helped a lot of Indigenous Australians, I'm biased here, of course, is sport, which has given them a release, given them an identity, given them a sense of personal self-esteem, and that's what we've got to continue to do. Michelle, very refreshing to talk to you, and thank you for being with us tonight. And Amanda, we'll see you next week. Many thanks as well.